Welcome to the Intercut podcast channel, the weekly place to hear the latest on the movies, TV, and entertainment that people can't cut away from. I am your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, putting his slants in slant, it's Taylor J. Williams. How's it going, man?
Hello. Doing well. Good to be back.
Yeah, always happy to have you on the podcast. Happy to be discussing New York Film Festival movies. I feel like we saw a lot of each other at New York Film Festival this year. You made it out to a lot of the screenings this year.
Yeah, totally. I think my final tally was 27 movies,
awesome.
Which I think is a considerable number more than last year, which I'm feeling pretty good about.
Yeah, I think you might even have me beat. I need to add up my tally. I forgot to do that, but we'll get to the best of those movies. I'm excited to talk about the best of them because New York is such an interesting place where they take the best from Cannes and the best from Venice and a few other places. And then this year, a couple other world premieres, which is unusual for the New York Film Festival. And they have this reputation for being the best curated film festival in the world, being that you were able to see so many movies at the festival this year. What was your general takeaway about this year as opposed to other years? Did you find it particularly strong? Was it consistent, or what stood out about the selection at NYFF 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was a strong year. A lot of people were sort of decrying last year. I thought last year was pretty strong as well, but it was also my first year doing press coverage and seeing more than like 2 movies at the festival. So that could have also had some influence. But I think there were definitely a lot of through lines that you could tell even in the press screenings. Like they were pairing certain movies because there were certain thematic similarities, or I feel like there was a lot more slow cinema or slow cinema adjacent entries this year. Whether that's a sign that that's becoming a more commonplace practice, or if this specific set of films just got more attention for whatever reason. That was probably the biggest like overall trend, because I know last year The Brutalist was like the one long movie, whereas I feel like there were a number of 3.5-ish hour movies this year that no one really batted an eye about.
Yeah, and a 5-hour documentary as well, though I think we only got the first 2 hours of it at the festival. But yeah, definitely a strong year for slow cinema and those longer movies and those directors who are really willing to take a big chunk out of the runtimes. I feel like I often encounter those movies at New York Film Festival, but not necessarily with as much frequency or with as many that I respond to as much as I did this year. So definitely a lot that stood out in that way. And I don't know if it feels in general like 2025 is a big bounce back year for movies. So maybe it's just that. And we're seeing a lot of like fun directors and interesting actors with projects at the festival this year. 2 Linklater movies at the festival. Speaking of like connections between films, I always have a good time at the New York Film Festival, but I think there was a lot of consistent quality among the movies that I saw at the festival this year. And that's not even counting Marty Supreme, which neither of us got into.
Right. Yeah, no, very, very few movies I wasn't that crazy about. And even then, I feel like the floor was still pretty, like, I don't know, a handful of movies that were just like whatever. Nothing too egregious, I found.
Yeah, even the movies I didn't like, I felt were ones that I had an interest in for whatever reason, or at least felt like I could engage with in some way, even if it's just why they didn't work for me. So yeah, an interesting festival, and we will get into the movies that work the best and maybe some of the movies that didn't work the best in just a little bit. But first, let's make sure you're subscribed to the Intercut podcast, either the video podcast on youtube.com/intercutpod or the audio podcast available on most podcatchers. Also, follow Intercut on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are at Intercut Pod. That's at Intercut POD, and that is short for podcast. You can also support the show for as little as $3 a month here on YouTube by clicking the join button on our page to become a member, or going to patreon.com/intercutpod and signing up to join the Intercuties. You get early access to episodes like this one, as I drop my lens cap, the ability to help us decide future episodes of the show, invitations to the monthly Intercut video chats, and also beyond that, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because if we get to 255-star reviews, we'll reveal once and for all who is Alice Tully. There's no other way of finding out that information. Do you know? I had to look it up. I had to Google it.
People are dying to know.
Yeah. We will be on edge until we get there. But let's get into the New York Film Festival. I'm always so happy to have that in my backyard. Such a great festival. Hopefully some of y'all out there were also attending the festival this year. It opened with a pretty splashy movie, the newest film from Luca Guadagnino, After the Hunt, which is a new film about a college professor who finds herself in a bit of a bind when a star pupil levels an accusation against one of her colleagues. The film stars Julia Roberts, Io Debris, Andrew Garfield, and my fave, Michael Stuhlbarg, who is chewing up so much scenery in this movie. Really just giving his all and having so much fun, I feel like. The movie itself is an interesting mixed bag for me, in that I like a lot of the emotional texture that Luca Guadagnino imbues in this film. It is doing sort of like an intentional kind of inverse of the things that we expect from a social issues movie, and some might call it like an intentional provocation, although I feel like Luca has pushed back on that idea. But it lends itself to this sort of like kind of a mixed bag of scenes that are going for that are trying to evoke different reactions from people. I don't know. I'm not so sure how you felt about the movie. I was a little mixed on it. Did you end up positive on the opening night New York Film Festival movie?
I think I skew positively overall, just compared to where everyone else is at, but I was definitely mixed on it myself. And to what you're saying, I definitely think the movie is most interested in not necessarily pushing as many buttons as possible, but the way I sort of thought about it in my head, and maybe this is because I watched a House of Dynamite the night before and it was fresh on the mind, but it was like this sort of like social mutual assured destruction, where it's like it's not really trying to make a point that any one of these things is the problem. It's kind of just saying, this is the cultural landscape right now, and here's a situation where all these bombs go off and everyone is kind of destroyed in the process, if not professionally, then on some personal level. And I think that personal angle is kind of what saves this from being just empty provocateurism. Without going into too much detail of the story, there are certain details of Julia Roberts' character that later in the film, as we learn more about her, I was immediately a little off-put about how it fit into the grander narrative of the story. But walking away from it, I think, as I thought about it as a more personal than like sociological story, I think I appreciated more what they were going for there.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those movies that if you look at these characters as like representative figures, if these people are sort of like supposed to represent their genders or their demographics, then you're going to come away with it with a weird taste in your mouth. But if you actually look at them as characters and look at it through the lens of melodrama and how it affects them, it becomes a more engaging film. And it also has benefited from, I think, this really fantastic cast, who I found to be all pretty excellent here. Maybe not. I don't know if anybody here is giving their best work, but they're all really good actors. I mentioned I really enjoy Michael Stuhlbarg, who almost feels like he's in a different movie than the rest of the cast, but I didn't really mind that he kind of brought a curveball energy in his scenes. But it's also interesting to see Julia Roberts in this more withering mode, right? Like, she's known for being this kind of like smiley, effervescent presence in films, and she also just has this ability to look at you sternly in a way that's so cutting and dramatic. I don't know if there were any performances in particular that stuck out to you.
I mean, yeah, Michael Stuhlbarg was definitely MVP for me, which I actually have a video going up this weekend about After the Hunt. And as much as I wanted to, like, you know, really like pay him his respects, he really is so siphoned off. He's like important to Alma, Julia Roberts' character, again on a personal level, but in just like the way you sort of have to discuss the story as far as like relevant plot beats and stuff. I was like, oh man, I have no opportunities to just like talk about how great Michael Stuhlbarg is in this, because he's is such a, everyone in this movie is a very messy character, and for so much of it he seems like this sort of breath of fresh air, but the more time you spend with him, the more you sort of see how he has his own like venom, as he has these very passive aggressive strategies of sort of prodding at Alma in this not necessarily fading marriage. They're both sort of comfortable, or not necessarily comfortable, but they're accepting of where they're at. Like they're not, the marriage isn't in any sort of turmoil, but they're sort of in this constant state of passive aggression. And I think he toes that line very delicately. And yeah, he's clearly just having a great time.
Yeah, they're in their own version of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, right?
Absolutely.
With this other movie going on. I don't know. There's elements that are interesting. I did like how Siam Bhumikti-Pram, I believe, is the cinematographer, how he shot a lot of this.
Actually not. It was a departure. It was I forget his name. He DP'd at least some, if not all, of the Beyonce Lemonade projects.
Malik Hassan Saeed.
Yeah. And so cool. He's known for more experimental or music video type projects, more like, I guess, formalist, which, obviously Siam Bhumikti-Pram is, has a lot of unconventional work making up his main catalog. But that was one of the first things when the credits rolled, because I just assumed Siam Bhumikti-Pram shot this, and so when I saw it wasn't him, I was like, oh well, let's see where this goes. But there's definitely still a consistent look in how Luca frames a lot of his shots in this sort of canted way. A lot of like, there's one specific scene where Alma and Maggie, Ayo Edebiri's character, are like hugging next to this tree, and like there's just a close-up of the hands on each other's back. And that's such a, like, I don't know, signature Luca moment, I thought.
Yeah, very effective though, I thought, here. Even I'm finding all these things that I liked about the movie, even though I'm pretty mixed to negative on it. I don't know. I ended up probably like 2.5 stars on it. But still interesting. Anyway, you mentioned one of the other movies I wanted to get into, A House of Dynamite, which was one of the bigger gala showings at the festival, the latest from Catherine Bigelow, a movie that's going to Netflix shortly. It's got a really stacked all-star cast, like lots of great actors who show up for maybe a scene. Like Caitlin Dever is in this movie as like a throwaway daughter character who gets like half a scene. It's really strange. Idris Elba, Rebecca Ferguson, Jared Harris, Tracy Letts. I really like Tracy Letts in this movie. Anthony Ramos, Moses Ingram, Greta Lee, the Jason Clarke. The cast goes on and on. We'd be here for a while if I listed them all. This is a movie about a missile being launched at the United States and the different levels of government reacting to the threat in real time. It's sort of a ticking clock paranoid thriller of sorts. And it's got this kind of Rashomonic element to it, in that we start the story following Rebecca Ferguson's character, who I'm so bad at remembering different lettered agencies or whatever, but she seems, like a general like defense response. I don't know even what the job would be. She's a person who stands by dashboards and lots of TV screens and tells people what to do. And then Anthony Ramos, who is stationed at a missile silo with defense capabilities. So it begins sort of with their being made aware of this bomb and the trajectory of the bomb coming towards the United States, and then it will zoom out and go back in time, Rashomon style, and show other people's perspective on the same course of actions. For me, this is where the movie really gets let down, because I found it to be a really urgent, intense thriller in that first third. Maybe a little bit like basic in its depictions of government, and it's very, like everybody is ultra competent in this movie, right? It's not really a reflection of modern governments. But when it does this jumping back in time, there's no longer like a ticking clock threat. We have been robbed of that urgency, and you're just sort of showing more people. I don't know. It just ends up kind of deflating the balloon and not really working in the way that I think the movie was hoping to for me. What did you make of House of Dynamite?
Yeah, I completely agree. In those first 20, 30 minutes, yeah, the movie definitely feels a lot cleaner than a lot of Catherine Bigelow's other work. Obviously, This is a Netflix movie, so surely there were certain technical specs she had to meet that are sort of at odds with some of her dirtier looking movies. But despite that, it was a really tense opening act, and I was very curious on a plot. Like, it goes pretty 0 to 100, and they're like, in 20 minutes this big thing is going to happen, and the whole time I was like, wow, this is happening so early in the movie, what could happen after this? I did not know going in it was like a Rashomon style narrative.
Neither.
So, and that's not the problem. I think each new reveal, it just feels arbitrary more than anything. In that opening sequence you mentioned, we're cutting between Rebecca Ferguson and Anthony Ramos, and you would think there's some sort of, I don't know, emotional or thematic connection between these two people specifically. But it turns out each chapter kind of just picks two people to follow, kind of at random. And the movie withholds certain pieces of exposition in making the decisions, but I couldn't tell you why, other than just like to keep us feeling like we're learning new things.
Right. Like there's one part in the first third where you're seeing the Zoom call and somebody doesn't have their camera turned on. And it's like, well, I wonder why their camera isn't turned on. It's really just banal, the reasons for those reveals. And it doesn't illuminate anything or come as a big surprise. It's just there. It's just more information.
Yeah, there's a character who is like still commuting in, and he answers the Zoom call on his phone, and at one point he's like running when things get more urgent, and it's funny to see that play out on the Zoom call from Rebecca Ferguson's perspective. And then we cut to his side of things, and it's like, what if I told you this whole time he was actually commuting in and on Zoom on his phone and then ran? It's like, yeah, that's what new information is there?
Right. It's technically a reveal, but a reveal of what?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that like we need new information. It just feels so pointless. It kind of rinses and repeats the same arc every time. We don't really get much new perspective on it. And not only that, there's a certain device implemented where it cuts to black at the end of each section. And without saying too much, I think like the repetition of that particular device really shoots the movie in the foot in terms of landing at the end with the intended emotional impact. I think based on just the vibes in the room, it took everyone a good like 10 to 15 seconds to realize the movie was actually over when it was over, and not that there was like another 30 minutes left.
Yeah, it really feels like it needs a little bit more at the end to actually land what it's going for. But I don't know. I get the idea behind ending when it does. It just doesn't really work, especially given with the way this film is structured. Arbitrary really is the best way to describe it. So yeah, that one didn't land for me at all, unlike the missile in the movie. Anemone, was another film that people were really excited about, world premiering at the New York Film Festival. The return of Daniel Day-Lewis to the big screen. First movie in, 6 years for the legendary actor, collaborating here with his son, Ronan Day-Lewis, who they co-wrote the script together. Ronan was the director of this film. It co-stars Sean Bean as well. And Sean Bean's character goes off to a cabin in the woods to reunite with his estranged brother, to talk and sometimes not talk for long stretches, and then decide to talk for long stretches about fathers and sons and being a brother and being a man and what happened to them and things that happened in the past and what they want to do in the future. And it's really, really laborious and plotting and just kind of sucks the life out of the room a lot. When they're not talking, they are very obvious about the not talking. When they're talking, they are really, really, really talking, monologuing. Obviously Daniel Day-Lewis, as I mentioned, is a co-writer here. It feels like he just had some ideas for monologues he wanted to put in, and Ronan let him go at it. It's just not a movie that I felt like had much verve to it at all. And I found this one to be kind of a chore. What did you make of the debut from Ronan Day-Lewis?
Yeah, laborious is a very good word for it. I feel like we started this podcast like, oh, this was such a great year of New York Film Festival. Now we've been like, After the Hunt, Catherine Bigelow, not very good. Anemone, not. House of Dynamite and Anemone were probably the worst two that I'd seen at the festival.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it starts out and it's trying to do this unspoken thing where it's like, oh, it's this sort of nonverbal communication that only brothers, can do. But just like you said, it's so obvious about it. It's so like, you can just feel the authorship of it in a very bad way. Like the movie feels, rather than confident, I would say full of itself. And then, there are definitely moments where it's trying to have a sort of I drink your milkshake-esque monologue. And just, it's so transparent about, definitely a lot of Daniel Day-Lewis roles. There's a hail sequence later in the film that is so, this isn't Daniel Day-Lewis, but, by extension, Paul Thomas Anderson, very Magnolia-esque.
I thought about that immediately. It is so Magnolia.
It's cribbing the same like reaction shots to it, even though I'm getting ahead of myself. Like you said, it's obvious about it when they're not talking, and it's trying too hard when they are talking. But also it's this totally stratified narrative where we're cutting back and forth between Sean Bean talking Daniel Day-Lewis into coming back into the world, and then we're cross-cutting with the son who's had some I guess he's AWOL after some altercation in the army. And on both fronts, like father, like son, they're kind of just pouting about, and everyone's like, you need to be an active participant in the world. And it's just kind of harping on the same beat over and over and over.
Yeah.
And then we'll sit in a scene for like 7 or 8 minutes, and then like we'll just pull out and we'll get some drone shot with this very moody electric guitar, which I forget the composer's name. I've enjoyed his work in the past. He did some Ari Aster films, but I just found this score so repetitive, which did not help at all with how much it was clearly trying to elevate the lackluster material on the page.
Is it Bobby Cryle or
Yeah.
Looks like he's done all of Ari Aster's films. Definitely is much stronger there than here.
Ronan Day-Lewis is a painter, which I didn't realize until the screening, and it was mentioned at the Q&A. So I went back and looked at a lot of his painting, and he seems like a solid painter, but it was interesting to see some of the motifs in his painting work that popped up in the movie. There's a certain hallucinated elk beast thing later in the movie, and that's in a ton of his paintings from what I can tell.
Interesting.
So it is interesting to think about the movie as him approaching it with the mindset of basically expanding this he already sort of has a voice in one medium, and he's trying to expand into the other, but just doesn't necessarily have as strong a grasp of the vocabulary.
No, I mean, it reeks of the sort of earnestness that a lot of first-time filmmakers have, and I'm not somebody who's like allergic to earnestness, but it's so heavy here. It's also one of those movies where like an intense thing has happened in the past that all the characters know about, and they're going to allude to it and let you know that something happened, but they're just waiting until the end of the movie to tell you. And it's such a frustrating trope of dramas like this, where there's this like trauma that is hanging over the film like an anvil, and you're just forced to wait until the end to find out the information that maybe would make this character more interesting.
Yeah.
It did not work for me. I'm not opposed to a future where Ronan Day-Lewis makes a better movie than this one. Maybe he just needed to get it out of the system. But a bit of a shame that the return of Daniel Day-Lewis is not one to be celebrated here.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, it has gotten Daniel Day-Lewis not just to come out of retirement, but to backtrack on his retirement statement completely.
Exactly.
So I guess we'll be seeing more from him in the near future. Probably not in the same capacity we used to, but this wasn't a one and done thing.
Definitely. We'll be interested to see what he ends up doing next, and hopefully we'll enjoy it more than this one. Let's get into a movie that I think we hopefully enjoyed more than those first three. I'm not so sure. Father, Mother, Sister, Brother. This film was the Golden Lion winner at the Venice Film Festival this year, which I think saddled it with some heavy expectations and maybe some preemptive criticism, because it beat out a lot of movies that maybe would be quote unquote more worthy, or are maybe a little more like hotly anticipated than the latest film from Jim Jarmusch, which is a relatively minor work, if we want to be honest about it. A triptych about mothers and daughters and fathers and kids and brothers and sisters. It's fathers, mothers, and brothers and sisters, brothers. It's these three stories of different families that have these recurring elements, and it's got a lot of Jim Jarmusch's signatures in terms of its tone, the sort of like wry comedic dialogue, the very disaffected performances from the actors. And I, it's light for sure, but I kind of enjoyed this one. What did you make of Father, Mother, Sister, Brother?
Yeah, I liked it too. I was a little off-put at the start. I think visually this is a very wonky movie, particularly the driving scenes. And I know this is like a very...
It opens on this really long sequence with Adam Driver and Mayim Bialik in like a pretty obviously green screened car.
Yeah, it's like, they shot, really shallow focus, like Adam Driver's shoulders are out of focus, but then the green screen is like totally crystal clear. It like looks like an unfinished image.
Really.
And I know that's like a, very surface level thing to point out, but that is like what ushers us into the movie. And so I started kind of on shaky footing. But once it got along, I found particularly the first two segments to be very sweet and deceptively heartbreaking vignettes. Naturally very like quotidian, down to earth, Jarmusch style. I think the biggest strengths of the movie are just like all these very subtle moments where these family members effectively take each other for granted. Mm-hmm. We have in the first segment just a random checkup on their dad, played by Tom Waits. In the second segment, it is like their one yearly tea time that they reconvene. And, from the audience perspective, you're just sort of, everything is played so straight, so dry, but you're sort of filled with this anguish of like, just like, tell each other you love each other.
Yeah.
Just this sense of like time is passing, and these moments are so precious and the characters don't realize it. And I thought that was very strong in a way that cut through some of the, I found, wonky filmmaking. I think this is not a movie that needed the scope of production it clearly had. obviously there are 3 units in this movie. Each segment takes place in a different country, but just watching the credits go by for so long, I was like, this could have been like in early Jarmusch style, very run and gun, and I think it would have felt a lot more earnest. So I guess overproduced would be the word I would use. And then the last segment I still enjoyed, and it's doing this sort of reversal of, rather than being about these moments of families taking each other for granted, it's about these siblings reflecting on their parents, and it's sort of about the earnestness after their passing, where, again, it's like the things, they're not necessarily remorseful or like filled with regret over the things they didn't say, but the things they are saying are how you feel about your family after they pass, after you've had all these opportunities to communicate these sentiments to them. And totally. I think the more earnest stuff maybe, like, I don't know, spelled things out emotionally a little too much. Like it didn't cut to the heart that I thought the first 2 segments did, but I still enjoyed it more than I thought at the start.
Yeah, I like how you put it, and how the third segment is sort of in communication with the first 2, because I like how those first segments, like, there's a sort of a lack of sentimentality in them that does in turn almost make it feel tender in a weird way. Like maybe it's you as an audience member putting it on top of the film, but it has the awkwardness, the stiltedness in these family get-togethers does sort of highlight the moments where there is warmth between them in a weird way. There's also just a kind of funny little element in that middle segment where Kate Blanchett and Vicky Krieps are playing English sisters, and they explain Vicky Krieps' accent by saying she went to school in Brussels.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I thought I found it like a slight delight. It's not. Yeah. It's not going to be on a lot of best of the year lists, but I thought I took away a lot from what was like not a very big movie in a lot of ways, in some ways at least.
Yeah, I think very much by design, it sort of feels like a Sunday afternoon. Nothing too notable, but, that's definitely the mode Jarmusch sort of revels in.
And then let's talk about one last movie before we get into our top 5s from the festival. The closing night film of the New York Film Festival was the world premiere of the latest directed by Bradley Cooper movie, Is This Thing On?, which he co-wrote, oddly enough, with Will Arnett, which seemed like an odd pairing to me until it got time for the Q&A and seeing them on stage together. It's like, oh, they're just bros. They obviously met at some point and got along and just are good friends now. So Will Arnett here is the star. Bradley Cooper has a supporting role, although Will Arnett's got kind of like the Bradley Cooper coif going with his hair. I always love when a director makes their protagonist kind of look like them. In this movie, Will Arnett stars as a man going through a divorce from his wife and turning to stand-up comedy in his sort of existential angst. It is sort of a melodrama, or sort of like a dramatic comedy in the mold of Albert Brooks or even some Judd Apatow. It's got like a sort of looseness that is different from the previous Bradley Cooper films. It's a lot more grounded and a lot more handheld in a lot of ways than I think I'm used to from his previous 2 films, and in some ways also not as ambitious, although maybe a bit more personal in what it's talking about, in the emotional truths it's trying to depict. I enjoyed it because I'm kind of predisposed to enjoy dramatic comedy like this one, but it is not necessarily like the most original. It felt very familiar. I didn't find it to be necessarily like a terribly insightful film about divorce, but it was one that had some fun performances and was mildly funny. Maybe a bit disappointing because I tend to like Bradley Cooper's movies, but I like this one, even though it's far from being a movie I would describe as loving. I think we kind of felt similarly. Maybe you were even not as high as I was on Is This Thing On?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely enjoyed it. There are aspects to which it feels a little like it's definitely his most grounded movie, but there's still an element of like it feels removed from like I don't know. You and I were talking about how in the Q&A, Bradley Cooper was like, I wanted to portray my New York. And it's like all the New York stuff is still very like, these people are in a different like class stratosphere. And there's a certain level of remove there that the movie doesn't reckon with. But
it's a little bit New York experienced by somebody who drives into the city, not who takes the subway,
Exactly. And I did enjoy it for the most part. And I also very much thought of Judd Apatow. And to that point, if this movie had come out like 15, 20 years ago, I think it would have just been like a standard theatrical release versus closing the New York Film Festival.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a dig at the film so much as where the industry is at right now. I think so. I didn't see Maestro. I liked A Star Is Born a lot, but Maestro, it just obviously it was impossible not to witness the Oscars campaign, and in that whole experience, I just saw a man destroying himself over this like this unattainable bar he wanted to reach with this movie.
It was a very sweaty campaign, and I wouldn't describe much about this movie to be sweaty.
Yeah, so I think if nothing else, there's something refreshing about this movie in that you can feel how much it's him just like letting himself breathe, just kind of making this thing happen. Of course, there's a degree to it. Another thing we talked about was, in the Q&A, Will Arnett was like, oh, it was just like making an indie film. And we're like, well, it was certainly higher profile than that. But I get what he means in that the spirit of it was very spontaneous. It was very like not preconceived by design, which also, has some marriage with the subject matter. And a lot of great comic cameos in the film as well, that kind of breathe life into this ecosystem that Will Arnett finds himself in.
Yeah, I mean, there is this thing of it being about Will Arnett's character just starting out as a stand-up comedian, and he gets his first gig where he's following Sam J, and then is immediately followed by Dave Attell on stage, which is not exactly the experience of most starting stand-up comedians. And I was talking to somebody outside the festival, and they're like, well, it's a movie. And yes, like that is not necessarily like an important detail. Like it doesn't really matter that all of his performances are at the Comedy Cellar, even though he's like just an open mic comedian. But it is the kind of thing that lends the film or deprives the film, I should say, of verisimilitude. Like it just feels less like naturalistic as opposed to most of this movie, which is aiming for that kind of naturalism. So while like I appreciate a lot of those elements, there is this kind of like fakeness to some of the movie that kept it from maybe landing as much emotionally for me, but I still found it to be pretty sweet. I found it to be, charming. I don't know if the stand-up comedy was as good as it needed to be. Sometimes it's like a movie about a band. You kind of need the band to actually have good music. I would have liked the stand-up to have been a little tighter and funnier, but I'm not opposed to this movie. I enjoyed a lot of it. Yeah, I was gonna say, and Bradley Cooper, who we haven't singled out for his acting yet, I thought was like really, really fun whenever he showed up on screen.
Oh, absolutely. And, that sort of also goes with the whole, like, this is him decidedly not trying. He plays this, like, total stoner character who, he definitely saved some of the best material for himself. But I thought he really delivered in the comic relief role. I feel like he was just like so magnetic every time he's on screen. Oh, so what I was going to say about the stand-up, like I definitely get the line they're towing of like, he's not supposed to be a very good comedian. He's just starting out. And, they mentioned they had to like cut certain jokes out because they were too funny.
Right.
It didn't fit the character. But I definitely agreed watching it. There were moments where I sort of like tensed up, and not in a way that I felt that they were intending.
Yeah, like there's also just moments where the crowd is reacting very generously, and I don't know.
Certainly.
I've seen stand-up shows. Crowds are not always that generous, you know.
Yeah.
I've seen comedy in New York.
I was a little suspect when they were like, "Oh, all the laughs were genuine." I wasn't in the room, but I have to imagine there was some coercion.
Yeah, all the laughs were genuine. Everybody we paid to be on the cast and crew laughed at the jokes in the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah, still enjoyable enough though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the movies we really liked. Let's get into the top 5 films from NYFF 2025. Taylor, you want to kick us off with your number 5 movie?
Number 5, I've got Peter Hujar's Day, which
okay.
I was surprised ended up on the top 5, but I thought about it, and I don't know. This is a movie that's sat really well with me, and it's definitely not for everyone. It serves multiple purposes. At once, it is a very rote, not even retelling, recital of this manuscript, or this transcript of this conversation. It is just Ben Whishaw reciting what Peter Hujar said, and it is very, reverent to the source material in that regard. It feels very like dry and clinical, and the material itself is just so engaging. You could have, shot this in any capacity, and I think like the vibrance of his day and his description and the mannerisms, just how he cuts himself off mid-sentence, and his various like micro insights are very engaging in their own right. And on that level, the movie's basically just like an engaging podcast. But then there's another degree to which the monologue sort of becomes like, I likened it to like a drone track, and the movie becomes much more about just like capturing the geography of this apartment and basically just conjuring this vibe of a New York that doesn't really exist anymore. And that's one of the through lines that I thought was very prevalent in the festival this year. Obviously, Peter Hujar is name dropping Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, Susan Sontag, all these people that, just call him up on a random weekday. And we don't see any of this life. We see this apartment that sort of captures the vibe in rough approximation. But I think because it's not so devoted to like showing every detail, I think like what the movie conveys about this period in the New York art scene, without showing it, it speaks a lot more than... we can talk about this later, but a movie that played early in the P&I screenings was this movie Late Fame, which centers around these kids who are very obsessed with trying to revive the beatnik scene, and are sort of like, trying to grasp every tie to the beat generation possible. And I think they're played very satirically in that movie, but I think it speaks to this general longing for that time period that I think Peter Hujar captures in a way that is not just like empty nostalgia. I think it makes itself modern in a way that like, makes peace with the time that's passed, even if it is so like analog. And I don't know, maybe I'm just rambling at this point, but I found it a lot more compelling than I intended, especially because I'm pretty sure it was originally meant as a short film, and it just kind of got longer and longer. It's not like, it's like 70 minutes, but
yeah, it's still pretty short, but I didn't know that detail about it. That's interesting. Yeah. So the latest from Ira Sachs. I'm glad you got so much out of the movie. I think there's so many well-observed elements in it, and the performances are like so fantastic. It's Ben Whishaw and Rebecca Hall, I believe.
Yeah. And she's great, even with so little to interject.
Yeah, but just in those moments, they are so great with each other. I found it's sort of like it's limited scope to be a little bit like claustrophobic or like maybe feel a little bit trapped, but there are so many parts of it that are so vivid that like I feel bad not being higher on the movie. So I'm glad that we have representation for somebody enjoying Peter Huger's Day, because I really like Ira Sachs a lot.
Yeah, no, and I don't put it past anyone to not connect with the movie, and I think it's definitely pushing its own limitations a lot in certain segments, particularly some of the like interstitials where it'll just be like a slow motion shot of Ben Whishaw with Mozart blaring, and I kind of get how they're breaking up the piece, but there were definitely flourishes like that where it feels like they're kind of stretching the material a little bit. But yeah, that's one that I'm pleasantly surprised has sat so well with me.
Great. Well, from Peter Huger's Day and one movie that might test some audience's patience to another one that I think tested a lot of audience's patience. My number 5 is The Mastermind, the latest film from Kelly Reichardt, which hilariously, I'm not sure if you saw, was the AMC Screen Unseen this week. So the audiences who are like signing up to maybe watch some new action movie or horror film blind just got met with a really slow, methodical, almost 2-hour Kelly Reichardt film. This is probably a minor work in my opinion in her catalog, but still one that I responded to. This film that is about a former art student who is turned into a art thief, masterminding this heist and just watching these sort of ramifications of his actions spill out of his control. It's a cleverly titled movie because it gives you this implication that you carry into the film, which to me reminded me of my reaction to watching the latest David Fincher film, The Killer, where you were similarly greeted with somebody who has the sort of veneer of expertise, and they appear to be ultra competent, super prepared, really smart, right? And the movie is kind of about revealing slowly all the ways in which they are not the person that you think you just met, that they are kind of a buffoon who's just sort of stumbling through things. And I thought the way that was depicted through this really patient, methodical, deliberate way that Kelly Reichardt paces her movies, where you are seeing every bit of minutia in the execution of an art heist, right down to Josh O'Connor climbing up every rung of this one ladder. It's a really interesting kind of like a deconstruction of an art heist style movie. It's also met with this kind of like really driving jazz score, which is an interesting sort of contrast for how patient Kelly Reichardt's movies are. And it has this kind of interesting backdrop being taking place during the Vietnam War with protests going on, which doesn't really add a whole lot to the film other than, giving it some pretty settings, I guess, and some cool costumes. It's like I said, probably a minor work for Kelly Reichardt, but I just kind of enjoyed how she went about putting this one together.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated how homespun the movie felt, and how very grainy 35 millimeter, and yeah, just lingering on every minute beat. The ladder scene was a standout for me as well.
Yeah.
I think I kept waiting for the movie to connect with me in a way that it never quite did, even though I would say I frequently enjoyed it. I appreciated to a certain extent what she was going for with the Vietnam stuff, this character who's sort of in a position where he can afford to ignore the stuff going on in the backdrop until it sort of becomes unignorable, without saying too much. To your point, she's not doing enough with it early on. Well, it's in this weird position because, of course, part of the point is he's ignoring the protests, and they are just on the periphery and they don't affect his day-to-day life. But
right.
it becomes important to the payoff of the film in a way that I did not find particularly rewarding. And I remember when her last film, Showing Up, came out, which I enjoyed quite a bit. That one is very much just about this art scene, and I think she got some backlash for maybe betraying some of her more political instincts with that film and sort of zeroing in on this siphoned off community. And I think this felt in some ways to be a response to that critique, still sort of capturing the myopic nature of the art scene and this very embittered art student, but in a way that is trying to place it in this broader context a little more. And I appreciate that, but for whatever reason, it didn't fully work for me. But I still enjoyed a lot about the movie. Biggest crime, in my opinion, is that Alana Haim is criminally underutilized.
Yeah, almost barely there. It's a shame, for sure. Although a fun little performance from John Magaro, who I feel like is in most of Reichert's movies now, right?
Yeah, the last few. In his fashion, he shows up for a few minutes and just like gives such a soulful performance out of nowhere and then disappears.
Yeah.
That was a standout for me as well.
Yeah. All right, so The Mastermind is my pick for number 5. Let's go back to you for your number 4.
All right, number 4, I've got No Other Choice, the new Park Chan-wook.
I got this a bit higher on my list, so we can hold off a little if you want.
Yeah, that works for me.
Cool. I'll talk about my number 4, which I feel like you haven't seen. Did you catch Pillion from director Harry Leighton?
I did not. That's one of the ones I was really bummed to miss.
Yeah, not one that I would say was necessarily like the ones I was most anticipating, but maybe the one that stuck with me among the most. I really, really enjoyed this fun sort of subversive take on a romantic comedy. This is about a kind of timid gay man played by Harry Melling who is unlucky in love and searching for some kind of connection. He's a gay man, and he lives with his parents who are extremely supportive and are really trying to push him out there, but he has all these sort of insecurities and lack of social confidence. He ends up meeting a kind of enigmatic and reserved, quiet leather-clad biker guy played by one of the most handsome men in the world, Alexander Skarsgård, who sort of takes him on as a kind of submissive in a BDSM style relationship. And it's this really fun sort of juxtaposition between the kind of sadomasochism in BDSM relationships with the sweetness of romantic comedies and the sort of hopeful nature of Harry Melling's character, where he's so happy to have found this connection. But it also is one that I think takes this community really seriously and navigates the intricacies of those power dynamics in those relationships really well. And beyond all that, it is just hilariously funny in the awkward nature of these interactions, in the timidness of Harry Melling's character, his predisposition to try and please, whether that is in banal social interactions or in extremely sexual situations. I found this one to be a real delight and very great in terms of the ways that it was able to take a familiar genre and find a really unique path into it. So yeah, hope you can catch up with that one soon.
Yeah, definitely looking for public or press screenings of that one soon. Yeah, I've seen the trailer. It looks like such a refreshing spin on something that is, sort of historically been characterized as a much more mentally abrasive community.
Right.
And so I definitely want to check that one out.
Yeah, I would highly recommend. What do you have at number 3 on your list?
I believe I have It Was Just an Accident.
Nice. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So this is the Jafar Panahi movie that he, infamously was meant to give a talk at, and did not get his visa approved due to the government shutdown, and it caused a whole kerfuffle at the festival.
Made it eventually, though.
Yes, he did, and we saw him as we walked out of Is This Thing On?
Yeah, and then Marty Scorsese walked by too.
Oh, I didn't catch him.
Yeah, I think it might have been after you left.
But yeah, so, Panahi has a career of sort of making movies under severe restrictions, to put it lightly. And, he has navigated that landscape in various ways. And here, his sort of workaround was primarily focusing the drama of the story in the back of a van, where the story is this group of Iranian former political prisoners stumble upon their torturer, essentially, and capture him and contemplate what to do with him once they have him. And he's sort of this hot potato in the van. And I think it's just such a brilliant scope of production. One, it's so mobile, so just on a production level, there just such a clever way of having this still vast tableau of the city while having like a central location, so to speak. But it's also like the renegade nature of the filmmaking speaks to the activity in the film, and I think it just operates on so many different registers because it's a lot funnier than you would think. It's this very intense story, but it's sort of positioned in this almost screwball comedy narrative where it's like they're disrupting a wedding, they're picking up members along the way, they're kind of bickering with each other in at times comedic ways over whether or not to murder a guy who tortured them in these brutal ways. And it doesn't necessarily undercut the severity of what happened to them or what's still going on, but it approaches it in such a multifaceted way that I found incredibly compelling. And, on top of the tonal juggling act, I think it does a good job navigating a lot of very nuanced perspectives on the subject of retribution and political violence that I think is, very, of course, topical in the U.S. right now, but, speaks to a more universal human experience.
It's one of those subjects that's eternally relevant.
Yeah, that's kind of my spiel.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This was going to be one of my honorable mentions. It is such a surprisingly entertaining film, probably the most accessible movie that Jafar Panahi's probably made. I haven't seen everything he's made, but this is one that I could see mainstream audiences even responding to. As you mentioned, structurally it kind of is like a One Crazy Night movie in the way that it is going between these different people and picking up people along the way, and it sort of has this lingering question throughout, like what are they going to do about this man in this van? And while it is both quite funny and full of really fun characters, and it also, as you mentioned, has this really thoughtful element to the ideas of retribution around it. And I found it to be quite a stunning development for Panahi. And, it's a movie that is extremely successful just on its own, and then becomes that much crazier to think about when you consider the circumstances under which it had to be made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great pick. Like that one a lot. It was just next. I think that one is starting to roll out into theaters as well. So if people are looking for it, they should check their local listings. Probably going to be in Oscar discussions as well. I'm assuming this year. Anyway, my number 3 is going to be Sentimental Value. Do you have this on your list?
That's my number 2, I believe.
All right, so why don't we talk about it now? The latest film from Joachim Trier, which is about a pair of sisters who reunite when their estranged father returns to the home they once all lived in together, with an offer to cast one of them in a film loosely based on their lives. It's another film from Joachim Trier that sort of analyzes the role of media in our emotional journeys, and also it tackles the idea of processing trauma through art and perhaps the futility behind some of it. It is a father-daughter story. It's the story of being an artist. It is a really fun and funny movie full of big emotions as well. I was a huge fan of his last movie, The Worst Person in the World, and so I carried pretty high expectations into this one. And I don't know if I liked it quite as much as that last movie, but I still think this one is a really thoughtful and really beautifully written film. What did you take away from Sentimental Value?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And thinking about it in comparison to The Worst Person in the World, it's definitely a more focused movie, a smaller scale, but it's still surprising upon reflection to think about, the number of different subjects and lenses it approaches. It's this very personal family story about loss and this fraught father-daughter relationship. It's sort of a filmmaking satire, very, take some jabs at Netflix and just the various difficulties of pre-production.
There's a lot of jokes at the expense of like actors trying a new, more artful project. In the case of Elle Fanning's character, who's this American who sort of parachutes herself into this Norwegian production and tries to put on an accent and all sorts of things.
Right. There's this through line of aging that is very part and parcel with the filmmaking thread, but as Stellan Skarsgård sort of encounters some of his older associates and realizing that they're not they don't have the physical capabilities they used to.
Not all as virile as they once were.
Yeah. Without saying too much, there's a degree to which the movie becomes a little Vertigo-esque. It's not exploring the same thing psychologically, of course, but the sort of double act and the sort of dissociation one experiences when they're sort of forced to adopt someone else's identity, and how that's again channeled into the art here, I thought was, very fun and insightful. And yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that always like surprises me about Joachim Trier's movies is how much room there is to breathe in them. There's like a whole side story with the theater troupe that like structurally doesn't need to be there, but it just gives a little more dimension to the characters' lives and their world and stuff. And also how earnest he is, because obviously there's a lot of satirical components to this and a lot of his work, but that isn't the predominant emotion. For as many jabs as he gets in, these are very heartwarming. Heartwarming almost makes it sound too phony.
It never tips over into cynicism. It is a still like fundamentally good-natured and optimistic in terms of its worldview, I believe.
Yeah, of course it's called Sentimental Value, but it doesn't feel overly sentimental or ironic in its sentimentality. I think it just takes the emotions of the characters very seriously and leans into that, and I think that's a very strong guiding force for him. And I think he's done it again.
Definitely will satisfy people who enjoyed the last one. I think it's a really, really valuable movie. Excited for more people to be able to catch up with it. And also, again, I keep going to performances, but Renate Reinsve still is so phenomenal. Was a discovery for me in her last movie, but everything I've seen from her since, she's just a really, really captivating screen presence.
Absolutely.
Oh, and a lot of people are talking about Stellan Skarsgård as a potential frontrunner for Best Supporting Actor. Do you have any thoughts on his performance in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was great. I would totally be happy to see him on the board. I know the conversation right now is very Sean Penn heavy, but I do think as far as like, three-dimensional human performances, I think Stellan Skarsgård would probably take the cake in my memory right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he's been such a phenomenal actor for so long, but this is also just such a textured performance for him too. So I'm glad to see he's getting some of that, some of those accolades this early on. Anyway, we are getting close to the top of our list, so why don't we talk a little bit about honorable mentions? Taylor, do you have any movies that just missed your top 5 cut?
Yeah, I would say Late Fame should be an honorable mention. That's one that I think that also played the first day of the press screenings, and I think a lot of both myself and a lot of people I talked to came out of it like, I enjoyed that. It was minor, nothing special, but it's one that just kept coming up in conversation throughout the rest of the festival and sort of lingered on people's minds. And it was a very unassumingly shot movie, but I think it's another movie that has so much earnestness for the characters, even with how like biting the satire is. This is a script from Sammy Birch, who wrote May December, which it was notable for. I mean, obviously, what made it onto the screen was great, but I think the script itself sort of had a viral moment just from the voice that comes through in the stage direction. So it's been exciting to see another work from her. It was adapted from a lost novella by, I forget his name, author of the novella Eyes Wide Shut was adapted from.
Arthur Schnitzler, does that sound right?
Yeah, Arthur Schnitzler. And so those two movies are naturally in conversation just through him, but also, again, this idea of like a New York that doesn't exist. Eyes Wide Shut, it's this sort of dreamy New York that was literally artificially recreated in London, and here it's these kids trying to conjure up, the Beat Generation, and they keep hounding Willem Dafoe like, oh, did you ever meet Allen Ginsberg? And he's like, no, I met this other guy who was a minor role in the scene, and they all sort of deflate.
Yeah.
But that's one that just has stuck with me. So I would definitely give that an honorable mention.
Yeah, there's just so many like wonderful observations and details that they put in the film, and even just silly things like him making a deal out of like, we call everybody by their last name. I enjoy those elements of Late Fame a lot.
Yeah, and Sax Burger is such a great name.
Yes, some great names in the movie.
Yeah. I think I want to mention one or two more, if you have any honorable mentions of your own.
Sure. I will throw out Jay Kelly as an honorable mention for me. I am a big fan of Noah Baumbach.
That's one I missed as well. It was like
okay.
Jay Kelly, Pillion, and then the Radu Jude movies. Those were like the big ones I missed. Yeah, and Resurrection.
Well, I don't know how you'd normally feel about Noah Baumbach's movies. I am pretty weak to a lot of them. I find him to be on my wavelength, even when I think most people aren't necessarily on his wavelength. There's just something about how he writes dialogue. There's something really tender to a lot of his films that I really, really respond to. And a movie featuring a performance like this from Adam Sandler was always going to win me over. But I think there's a lot to really enjoy about this one, which stars George Clooney as sort of an actor in his tribute stage, where he is getting a tribute at a film festival. He's a late in career actor. And it's, a somewhat familiar story about a man who's lived their life through art and seeking fame and fortune rather than developing connections of value and family bonds, and looking back later in their life and wondering where all those connections were and why he feels so lonely. So it's definitely familiar in a lot of ways, but I think the sort of emotionality that Baumbach is able to imbue in the characters, it just really makes it really resonant here. Particularly, I feel like, you have this George Clooney performance, and it's to me one of the best performances he's had in the last 2 decades, where he's full on movie star charm, that kind of winning smile, and the way he can just sort of win you over with a look, like in Ocean's 11 or something like that, is totally present here. But then he has also these very like hangdog, frown, sad expressions where he's just kind of ping-ponging between these two emotions, and Sandler as his sort of right-hand man manager is trying to navigate him through all of it, and just every word he says is burdened with so much the weight of the responsibility for so many things. You can feel how much he has dealt with through the years for this guy, and I just felt it was so lived in and funny and true. I like a Noah Baumbach movie a lot, so I really responded to Jay Kelly.
Yeah, I'm definitely a huge Noah Baumbach fan. I was so disappointed I couldn't catch that one.
Yeah,
but I'll see it soon enough.
Yeah, Netflix, so it won't be that far down the road for anybody. I'll also throw a little bit of love. I mentioned it was just an accident in my honorable mentions, but Nuestra Tierra. I don't know if you were around to catch this one. The
I was not.
Documentary from Lucrecia Martel. This is about an incident in Argentina in 2009 where people were attempting to evict members of an indigenous community from an area of land and got into an altercation that resulted in the shooting death of one of the indigenous men. And it is this story that's told partially through the court case that is seeking justice for this action, but it's also told through these interviews and these flashbacks and these photos and videos, and it feels really kind of pastiched in that way, to, like a collage, a visual collage in a lot of ways, and it has this kind of meditative quality to it, but also because it is concerning not just this person who died, but the legacy of this community that also in its own way is being pushed out and seeing its fabric torn apart. It feels like it's haunted by all these different elements. And I found it to be really, really powerful in a really stark examination of the ways in which indigenous communities are often undermined or belittled and just generally disrespected, especially through these official systems. So yeah, one of the standout documentaries of the year for me, Nuestra Tierra, or Landmarks in English. Any other honorable mentions that you want to mention?
This movie, I Only Rest in the Storm. Pedro Pino.
I missed that one.
Portuguese, I guess, co-production with Guinea-Bissau. Follows a Portuguese engineer who takes a job in Guinea-Bissau to essentially determine whether or not to proceed with the construction of a road into a more indigenous region. And it's a 3.5-hour narrative film. I think it has 10 credited screenwriters, but it is very much about, I think I saw someone write about it, that it feels like someone set out to make a documentary, saw the futility in making a documentary, and then made a narrative about the ethos of making a documentary. This guy has this sort of white savior complex. He wants to come in and do right by the locals and the natives, and sort of mediate between all these conflicting ideologies. And the more people he talks to, the more contradictions become apparent in this region. You see ultra wealth and poverty, totally cohabitating. And it's, on one hand, this very dry series of testimonies from people on whether or not to construct this road, with very real world applicable reasons behind it. But then it's also sort of about, I'm not sort of, it's very much like coming of age isn't the right word, but this guy, comes into this new area and he befriends a lot of the locals, and it's very sexually charged at times, and it sort of has this balancing act of such dry intellectual material with this just raw primal energy of this sort of party scene, and it made for such a fascinating watch that definitely grew on me more and more as I watched and as I stepped away from it. I think there are, maybe some surface level critiques to be made about like, oh, this could be cut here, this could be cut here, this doesn't need to be 3.5 hours. But I think it's consistently engaging, and it has such a strong like ebb and flow construction that I was very impressed with it. And that's one I would recommend, because I don't think the festival it was really doing too much to promote. I mean, I don't know, but this is not one that people were talking about. I did not see much buzz for the film. There were like, I don't know, 20 other people in the screening with me.
Oh, really?
Which, yeah, it was not a popular screening at all. So I would definitely recommend more people put this film on their radar.
Yeah, I mean, a 3.5 hour Portuguese film is like a big undertaking for a lot of people, but it sometimes those movies end up being really rewarding. And obviously, if it's programmed at New York, they found something of value in it. You found a lot of value in it, it sounds like. So I'm going to have to put that on my radar. I'm sorry I missed out on it. Before we finish the honorable mentions, I'll give a little bit of love to the pair of Linklater movies. I think, did you enjoy both of these, or at least a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. I'd say I enjoyed Nouvelle Vague more than Paper Moon.
Blue Moon.
Blue Moon, yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed them both, but I found them both, a little bit lacking in different ways. Nouvelle Vague, it's kind of I was telling you, it felt almost to me like a caper movie in some ways. Like, I can't believe they're getting away with making a movie this loosely.
Yeah.
If you are the kind of person who enjoys doing the Leonardo DiCaprio meme, when you see somebody you recognize, you'll get a lot, and you enjoy the French New Wave, you'll get a lot out of all the cameos and stuff. I found it to be like a fun vibe, and I also really enjoyed the Zoe Dutch performance in this. The sort of like anglicized French she's speaking in a lot of the movie was fun. But Blue Moon also as the story of Loren's heart on the evening of the premiere of his former partner Richard Rogers's Oklahoma, as he sort of drowns his sorrows in over shots of whiskey that he doesn't want to drink at a bar with Bobby Cannavale. It's sort of like a fun artist reflections on life with lots of like witty barbs and pithy dialogue. My general feeling from it was, as much as I enjoyed aspects of it, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more on stage than I did in a movie. It wasn't a lot that was very like cinematic about how it was put together, and it just really plants you in this room, doesn't move a lot. I think the performances are all really excellent. It just is a little bit like turgid as a film, but I kind of like the script.
Lorenz's ability to just like talk and entertain himself. It's kind of similar to Jean-Luc Godard. The films ended up being more similar in certain respects than I anticipated, but I agree. I try not to be too like about stage to film adaptations. Like, I used to be a lot more of the mindset of like, oh, they didn't make it cinematic enough to warrant the adaptation, and I try to get myself out of that headspace. But watching Blue Moon, it really felt like we were just locked off for 20 minutes at a time, and then we'd walk to another place, and we were just like, I don't know, I wanted to move around a little more. Not necessarily literally, but it just felt like we plant in one place, we move over, we plant in. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but
I think you are. It just doesn't have like a verve to how it moves from scene to scene. It kind of exists in a space in a way that to me reminded me of seeing a production on stage, where part of the fun of seeing a play is just like you're in the room with these people who are in this room, right? And that's kind of what the Blue Moon is trying to make. It's trying to make you feel like, oh, what is it like to sidle up to the bar and listen to Loren's heart opine on all these different subjects? And that just it just doesn't ultimately do much more than that, even though I enjoyed some of that. Anyway, getting back into the lists, my number 2 is Sirat. Did you have this one on your list?
I didn't, but I guess that would also be an honorable mention.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting movie about a father and son who arrive at a rave in the desert of Morocco searching for the father's missing daughter, and who'd search deeper into the desert for her as the film moves along, embedding themselves with a group of ravers in sort of a found family of sorts, and then the film proceeds to just like punch you in the face a couple times in a way that got such a strong reaction from the crowd that I saw it with. It's certainly one of the most memorable, like, just theater going experiences that I've had in quite some time. And I'm not sure there's like a whole lot I took away from the film in terms of like its deeper themes or greater meanings beyond the just idea that like doom is around every corner and we're all fucked one way or another. But I did think that there are few movies that have grabbed me by the shoulders the way that this movie did and glued my eyes to the screen. There's just something about how captivating, particularly that back half of the film is, and how viscerally I responded to it. You know, it jumps you, it startles you in a way that, you know, I guess you could describe as maybe cheap, but I found to be really effective, particularly because the way they really like plant you in the story and really make you feel like you're on this journey with these characters up against these odds. I find some of the details of this film to be really interesting too. The way that there is this like simmering conflict in the background of the movie that's not necessarily the focus, but is something that is really affecting all the action. I just found it to be pretty fascinating. And as much as I keep seeing new movies, I keep thinking about how Sirat made me feel.
Yeah, no, totally. I think to your point, like the biggest, like, I guess thematic takeaway I got from the end was just like in sort of a raver mentality, like let go of all inhibitions and just like I don't know, trust your instinct to guide you through life or whatever. But I think what people were really responding to was, you know, in a series of movies that are so like, you know, people go into them with this mindset of like, you know, very intellectual engagement and like, you know, deconstructing the movies as they're watching and trying to unpack all of the individual elements. I think Sirat is one of those movies that just sort of like disengaged that muscle and just, you know, people walk out of it sort of buzzing in a more physical way than a lot of the other movies in the festival. And yeah, I think that's valuable in and of itself. And I think to what you were saying, the material that's so compelling in the second half, I think depends on a more unassuming first half. It doesn't feel cheap. I think once it happens, it fully commits to it.
Yeah.
But it is also so patient getting there. And I think, unfortunately, I was sort of too primed going into the movie because I, you know, missed the press screening, and then I, you know, you gave me that ticket a couple days later, and I saw it at Alice Tully, which was great. But between that time, I had spoken to so many critics who were like, "Oh man, I'm not going to say what happens, but just be ready." Even like in the introduction for the film, he was like, "You know, I'm not one for spoilers, but I don't usually take spoilers to heart, but this is one where I'm not going to say anything." And I was like, okay, well, you didn't need to say even that. Like that in and of itself is sort of, so like the whole first hour, I was like, okay, well, something's going to happen. And I was just waiting for the thing to happen. And when it did, you know, it was great. And like, I really appreciated the construction of the film, but I kind of want to see it again, taking it for what it is and sort of,
Right.
Because the first hour is a lot more hypnotic, and I think without the expectation that like, oh, is the thing gonna happen now, you can step a lot more into the trance that he's building up there.
Totally. It is a film that does rely on you sort of not coming in with real expectations and just allowing yourself to go along with the journey. So maybe it is sort of antithetical to talk about it on this way on a podcast, but I do want people to get excited about it in some way. So
it's kind of impossible to like talk about it but not talk about it in that way.
Yeah. But I think it's also just like that first half really could be the whole movie and it would be satisfying enough.
It's very much revels in being this generation's sorcerer, down to the abrasive techno music being sort of a response to the Tangerine Dream synth score.
Exactly. So glad you enjoyed that as well. Sirat's my number 2. Let's talk about our favorite films of the fest. Why don't you go first?
So my number 1, it surprised me. I went into it very unassuming, and I was kind of blown away. Is this documentary called Below the Clouds?
Okay. Missed it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it wasn't like an empty screening, but people had definitely cleared out from, I forget what played before. Maybe it was like Magellan, and then
I think that might have been right.
Maybe people were too drained after the experience of Magellan. But no, this one really surprised me. Is documentarian Gianfranco Rossi, and it's documenting life in Naples in a sort of Frederick Wiseman-esque style of just like objectively planting down in these various locations. We follow a few different characters and their sort of day-to-day life, and it's another movie that sort of like It Was Just an Accident is sort of disalarmingly funny. The whole like thing looming over life in Naples is this threat of Vesuvius and the history of Pompeii that they're still digging up, and one of the characters we follow is an archaeologist training archaeology students. We also follow museum curators and not tomb robbers, but we follow a police unit trying fruitlessly to track down tomb robbers. And so there's this strong presence of history still alive in the city, both preserved and being eroded. The tomb robber thread is very much about like, there was all this like, precious history down in these catacombs for thousands of years, and just like that, it's been plucked away essentially.
Is this like the inverse of La Chimera or something?
Very much so. And so it's juxtaposing that with the archaeologist and the museum archivists, and so that's interesting in and of itself. But then we follow some of the townspeople. There's a like community tutor who he's like this old librarian guy, and he has all the kids in town just like study his place. He's a very harsh proctor in this room, but he has such an earnest relationship with the kids. It's also very funny. He's like toward the end of the film, he's like reading Les Miserables, and the kid's like, "Is that the book you picked up like 2-3 days ago?" And he's like already finished with the book, just this massive tome. The real funny surprisingly so component comes from this fire department call center, just from all the earthquakes and tremors that happen from the volcano. Naturally, everyone is genuinely terrified, but in their hysteria, people's sort of idiosyncratic nature comes through in the call center, whether it's paranoia over like, well, when's the next earthquake going to happen? And the fireman's like, well, I can't tell you that. Or like calling over the most mundane things. I think what's so great about the film is that it captures all these really spontaneous moments that, if it were just like a verite film, like the material would speak for itself. But it is captured in such stark black and white photography, very meticulously composed. Like it would work as like a totally like, forget the image quality, just capturing the material would be good. And it would also work as like a silent like tone poem of the life in this town. But the two sort of have this tension of like control and spontaneity that I found very exciting for as like slow and contemplative as the film is. And it's not necessarily like, the only real like threat of the town is this volcano, which there's maybe a climate change through line to be gleaned there. As far as like, I don't know, important issues, it's not like the most urgent film, but every now and then it does manage to speak to the world at large. One of the other threads we follow is this group of Syrian tankers who primarily work in Odessa. They're stationed in Naples, I think, shipping grain, and they're sort of coming to terms with the fact that they're going to have to ship back to Odessa in the midst of all the Russia-Ukraine chaos. And so, we go from all these calls of people who are like, my home was destroyed in the most recent earthquake, I don't know if I'm going to die tomorrow, to these tankers on the phone with their family, like, I'm shipping out to Odessa tomorrow. And they're like, well, at least you're in Naples where it's safe. And it's this irony of like, nowhere's really safe. There's always this volatility to life that I think is very poignantly captured. And so that was probably the biggest surprise of the festival for me. Highly recommend Below the Clouds.
I'm very excited to check it out. I'm sad I didn't see it. I'd heard amazing things. I think it premiered at Venice or TIFF and was getting some good buzz. But yeah, your recommendation only makes me that much more frustrated that I wasn't able to make that one. All right, so your number one is Below the Clouds. My number one, I'm going to go with the latest from Chan-wook Park, the film No Other Choice, which you had at number 4 on your list. This is a movie about a man who gets laid off from the job he's held for basically his whole life, and the humiliation of his post-employment endeavors and trying to navigate life without the thing that sort of gave him his identity. This is a movie that is very much about the ways in which capitalism forces us to see value in ourselves through our work, through our means of making an income, that it is not just a job, that it is kind of your whole identity and the thing that makes you valuable. And in the ways that it satires that, I thought it was really sharp and quite funny. But it's also this sort of riveting thriller about a man who hatches a plan to get a new job and the lengths to which he goes in order to ensure that he's the only viable applicant, and how in that journey he comes to see all these other people who are kind of like him, and that they are lost without the thing that once gave them a sense of purpose and a identity, and how they are, like him, equally desperate to have some new form of employment to cling to, if only to make them feel like they deserve to exist. I just thought it was really sharply done and feels really of the moment in a lot of ways. It really just riveting and entertaining movie. Why'd you have it at number 4 on your list?
Well, I'll say, like, my top 5 was very close contention. It was hard sort of beating any of them out, because I really love this movie. I'm not criticizing
placement. I'm glad you like it.
But no, I thought this was great. I think Park Chan-wook is one of the filmmakers who has most gracefully developed a digital style that carries a lot of the DNA of his older work, but finds new opportunities within it. Decision to Leave was of the same ilk, very modern, very digital, and sort of expressive of the alienation of digital life. And this isn't so much about that, but there is a strong through line of the company they're all laid off from is a paper company, and they're all talking about, like, they communicate via letters, because they're all like, if we don't use paper, who will? And so there's this sort of analog versus digital argument worked out in the film that, of course, there's an irony where the film itself is very sharply digital, but it sort of centers its critique around like AI as like the only logical endpoint. And Mansu, the main character, his like violent measures for like boxing out all the competition is sort of, in a way, just an exaggeration of what competitive market capitalism is like, because the person who originally got the job was effectively doing, just to a less extreme degree, what he ends up doing to the rest of them. Trying to be vague in my language here. But I think, it's such a sprawling epic. I mean, it's so like, the scope of it is a lot more tight knit for him. It follows this family. It's not like a grand historical epic or anything, but he still makes it feel very epic. And there are subplots with the son taking measures into his own hands at one point. And it's a film like Sentimental Value in this one specific way, that it doesn't need to have all this stuff, but it sort of adds so much more dimension to the world. And I don't know, there's just such a strong propulsion to the film.
No, it really, really moves, and that's not unfamiliar for a Park Chan-wook movie for sure. But it just the way in which it is able to go through these different subsections of the story does, as you say, give it this kind of epic quality. I do want to talk to you a little bit more about the digital photography in this movie. Just pick your brain about it, since you know more about cameras than I do. But there is just this really unique quality to the way he shoots things. One thing is that the way he uses devices is really cool. Like there's this one shot that I love where Mansu is laying on a couch and holding the phone above his head, as I feel like we're all familiar with doing. And he sort of frames it like it's a 2-shot. But another moment where like somebody's showing something on a phone, the phone goes to the lock screen, and you see his reflection in the lock screen. Just really clever uses of the technology like that. The thing that I really wanted to ask you about, though, is like that digital quality that the film has. Like, I think there's nobody doing deliberate zooms quite the way that Park Chan-wook is in not just this film, but in I noticed it a lot in The Sympathizer, his HBO show as well. And there's just real kind of like almost unsettling quality to the way that he'll move within the frame. Is that something that you're noticing as well in the movies?
Yeah, I think he's increasingly leaned into that sort of uncanny valley effect, which I think is part and parcel with the digital look. But you're right, the zooms are definitely part of it, sort of the Ken Burns effect. But yeah, I mean, the whole opening of this movie is like this barbecue. He's received this, he doesn't realize it at the time, but it's sort of his parting gift from the company, this like incredible cut of eel. And it's just like, he has this beautiful house, this beautiful family, but it has such a digital sheen, presumably a lot of green screening going on here. And it feels like a very artificial image in a way that I think very much services this life he's constructed for himself in his head, this image that is ruined by the realities of his employment situation. And I think that's sort of the driving force throughout the film, because No Other Choice is the title of this movie. It was adapted from this novel called The Axe, and there was a movie adaptation in the 80s, which is sort of a double entendre, like the axe getting axed from work and some of the more violent measures of the character. But I think the change to No Other Choice, I think, speaks so much more to the corporate speak of the times, and these uber wealthy executives who are like, oh, we have no other choice but to cut our entire staff and adopt AI, even though we're pocketing 99% of the revenue. And so similarly, Mansu as a character who's then motivated by that, he's like beaten down by the system, but he still believes in it. He still buys into it and thinks like, oh no, the system isn't bad, I just need to be better. And so he adopts a similar mentality of like, he has no other choice but to stoop to this extreme tactic, Whereas early in the film, his wife lays the cards out on the table. She's like, all right, we're going to have to get rid of the dogs. We're going to have to sell our devices. We're going to need to move into an apartment. And he's like, like losing the house is the big, it's not about losing his family or anything like that. Like the house is this like material possession of his that he just cannot cope with losing. And that's, you know, very much tied to his sense of self and his sense of status. But it's like, you know, you do technically have another choice, but it's the sort of mental gymnastics that have left him feeling as though he doesn't, that I think make it such a poignant motif throughout the film.
Yeah, exactly. The way in which he has sort of been conditioned, you know, in a way by society and by the role that he takes within his family to believe these things to be true and to be the things that have the most value. So I don't know. I think it's a very, very clever movie, one that will probably resonate with people. And, you know, it's not necessarily my favorite film that he's made, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of people respond to it for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, no other choice. My pick for the best of the fest. But that are our favorite movies from New York Film Festival 2025. I think this is the 63rd year of the New York Film Festival, still going strong. We will definitely be back for another one next year to make sure we keep up with all these great movies like this. But Taylor, thank you once again for recapping the New York Film Festival with me.
Of course.
If people want to hear more of your thoughts on films that played at the festival, check out that After the Hunt video that you were talking about. Where can they find it?
Yeah, so my YouTube channel, Taylor J. Williams, that video will be public as of recording tomorrow. So by the time this is up, yeah, hopefully it should be public. You can also find more detailed letterboxed blurbs of everything I saw over at Taylor Film Guy on Letterboxd. Some of the things we didn't touch on today. Those are sort of my main two outlets. And this year I've been writing for Slant Magazine a little bit. So you can go find me over there. If you just Google Slant Magazine Taylor Williams, you can see some of the pieces I covered, including for the festival, Nouvelle Vague, No Other Choice, and La Grazia, the new Paolo Sorrentino film.
Ooh, it's a nice tease. We'll definitely leave links for that. Congrats on that gig. It's a fun gig.
Thank you.
Yeah. Catch more from me at Zshevich across social media. That's ZSHEV as in Sentimental Value, ICH. And check out more videos from me at Multiplex Show, wherever you can find videos. You can also listen to every episode of the Intercut podcast on iTunes, on Spotify, on whatever podcatcher you use, maybe Pocket Casts. That seems to be a thing. I've never heard anybody say they use it, but our statistics show that they do. I use Overcast. And then make sure you're subscribed not just to the audio podcast, but to the video feed as well on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/IntercutPod, where you can watch our festive faces as we run through the latest in entertainment. Find new episodes of the Intercut podcast every Monday on our YouTube channel. And please leave a comment, like the videos. Consider heading over to iTunes to give us the much requested 5-star review. I guess it's not iTunes anymore. It's technically like Apple Music. It's always iTunes to me and in my heart.
Yeah.
Shout out to our listeners who put us on the film and TV podcast charts. Support our Patreon. You can support us on YouTube through the membership channel. Also, just follow us across social media at Intercut Pods to get updates throughout the week from me, from Arturo, from Amanda, from all the guests we feature, like Taylor on the podcast. And check out our Discord to keep the conversation going throughout the week. You can find a link to that in the description of this episode. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, the bridge over hell is thinner than a hair and sharper than a sword.